So hi everyone, and welcome to today's session of Healthy Discussions. Before we get started, I just got a few housekeeping notes. You'll notice the chat box and Q&A feature are both open, so please feel free to use them at any time. You can turn on your subtitles, which are auto-generated, by clicking the CC button on the bottom left corner of your screen. And of course, this session is being recorded and will be posted to Quality of Care NL's YouTube channel. So Healthy Discussions is a new webinar series launched by Quality of Care NL, where we have quality conversations about health, healthcare, and social systems in Newfoundland and Labrador. Our goal is to engage with you on these topics with the aim of continuing public conversations during the ongoing process of health transformation in our province. Public discussion also contributes to the growth of a learning health and social system in Newfoundland and Labrador. On the screen right now, you can see a definition of a learning health and social system as defined by Health Accord NL in its task force report. This definition might seem complicated the first time you read it, but what it really boils down to is health and social system that continuously improves through a culture of best practice, evaluation, equity, openness, and collaboration. The system learns and gets better, resulting in better care and health for all. Part of the definition states that individuals and families are active participants in all elements. By engaging in sessions like this one, by being an active participant in your own healthcare and wellness, by taking about and acting on issues that impact us as a society, you are contributing to a learning health and social system in our province. May 1st to 7th is Mental Health Week in Canada, and we are delighted to have 3 mental health promotion consultants from Newfoundland and Labrador Health Services joining us today. We have Bailey Reed, who works in the Eastern region, Lindsay Mitchell-Moore, who works in the Labrador-Grenfell region, and Tara Welsh, who works in the Western region. And joining Bailey, Lindsay, and Tara for today's discussion is Cheryl Etchegaray, who is a health policy analyst for Quality of Care NL. Cheryl has some questions to get our conversation started, but we will be taking questions from the audience. So please type your questions in the Q&A box, which is a little easier for us to manage. Sometimes questions can get lost in the chat as people chime in with their thoughts. Since today's discussion is being recorded, you may wish to ask your question anonymously, which you can do so by using the Q&A instead of the chat. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Cheryl.
Thank you, Robert. And thank you everybody for being here today. Before we start getting into some specific questions around mental health, we'd like to hear a bit about your team and what your prevention and promotion team at NL Health Services does. So can you tell us a bit about that?
Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen for a moment and bring up a couple of quick slides and go through a little bit about who we are at Prevention and Promotion at NL Health Services. So, can everybody see that clearly? Just give me the okay.
Good.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so the Prevention and Promotion team at NL Health Services, here are some of the focus areas and the strategic priorities of the things that we do. And I think when I kind of list these out, our work is definitely really diverse. And it's kind of hard to, I guess, quantify in a sense. But I think when I read some of these strategic priorities out, you're going to get a greater sense of what it is that we do and our work and who we are. So building community capacity is definitely a big piece of our work. So liaising, being liaisons between our community, the NL Health Service Authority, and also our government, and even our private sectors as well. Identifying resources within our community, within our health service, within our government. People with lived experience are definitely a focus area and a priority for us as well. Co-creating presentations, engagement sessions, that is definitely a major priority for our department. School health promotion, promoting to children, youth, teachers. ADHD, neurodiversity, all these things, autism awareness and understanding. We definitely have a hand in education and mental health promotion, addiction prevention around those topics. Life promotion and suicide prevention as well. We have a suicide prevention coordinator that sits on our prevention and promotion team. We have mental health in the workplace is another strategic priority. We have Paula Delahunty, who spearheads our workforce development series. So not only do, we educate people in the public and our communities and in our education systems, but also we educate our workforce as best as we can. And we educate ourselves on top of that in order to give out, I guess, the most best practice, up-to-date information possible. We work on stigma campaigns, general awareness, and mental health and addictions literacy. Substance use and corrections and justice is also a special niche in which we work. The alcohol action plan, we have particularly a hand in the recommendations as it relates to that, and initiatives as it relates to that. Overdose prevention, e-mental health services, and knowledge exchange. And what I mean when I say knowledge exchange is things like this, where, we're just connecting with our community and, multiple different groups. And we learn from you and you learn from us, and we just exchange thoughts and ideas and knowledge. So these are just the main things that we have, I guess, a strategic priority and action in the work that we do. And I think that gives a better idea. So next, just trying to move to the next slide here. Here we go. So our guiding principles, this will also tell you a little bit about who we are. So building healthy public policy. So we're definitely a stakeholder in that, as well as many other people who are probably on this webinar today. We're definitely a stakeholder in building public policy, creating supportive environments where people can thrive in the places that they live, work, and play. Strengthening community action through education and awareness. That is a huge, huge principle for us. Developing personal skills and reorienting health services. So that's just a little bit about who we are and kind of what I guess our strategic priorities and principles are. So I don't know if anyone else kind of wants to add to that.
I think you covered it well, Bailey.
Yeah, I'll
Thanks.
just add one thing. Our team consists of, so we're the regional mental health promotion consultants. We also have regional addictions prevention consultants who we work closely with. We have e-mental health managers. We have mental health and addictions coordinators. We have youth outreach workers. So we have a very diverse team of people doing this prevention and promotion work. And we work very closely with the clinical, the counselors in each of our regions. So we provide that full range of service from, prevention and promotion right up, to clinical intervention. So so I just wanted to point out who we are. And there's, we're just three of a much larger group.
Absolutely.
Right. Thank you. Well, Bailey, you said you would say a little bit about what you do, but I just learned a lot about what you guys are doing. And what struck me is you talked about community several times, connection to the community and the importance of that. So important for all health. And today we're talking about mental health. So maybe Tara, can you tell us what we mean when we're talking about mental health? What do we mean by that?
Sure thing. Well, there's a lot of different ways to describe mental health. I mean, I would use a state of well-being. So our ability to, cope with life's challenges and just be overall wellness. So in the past, I mean, we've had people define mental health as you're either mentally healthy or you're mentally ill. We certainly do not see it that way at all anymore. I mean, it's a continuum. And, the model that we use is that, we have, from healthy to anywhere in between. So healthy, mentally healthy, and, struggling is in between. And then on the far end of the other side of that spectrum would be illness. And because mental health changes, I mean, people can move at any point on this spectrum back and forth at any point in their lives, just the same as we have lots of changes in our lives or challenges that we face. But essentially it's, overall wellness, and it incorporates our emotional well-being, it's physical health. There's so many different things that can impact our mental well-being. And in fact, a lot of the things that we talk about when we're trying to promote positive mental health looks like general wellness things, because we could be promoting recreation activities, we could be promoting relaxation, we could be promoting leisure. All of those things help to add to people's mental well-being. So even if you're a person that has a mental illness, you could still have a high level of mental health, positive mental health, because that's, you are anywhere on the spectrum. Some days you're really well and some days you're not so well. And that applies for any type of illness, really. So I think, everybody, I think a key message here is that everybody has some level of mental health, like, and that spectrum ranges and it changes. So I hope that helps to clarify, because there's a lot of different definitions of mental health. And I feel like, it's still a huge misconception. I often hear in my world, people referring to mental health when they're actually talking about mental illness, or vice versa. So like those words aren't necessarily interchangeable, but yet we still have a long way to go, I think, in, what we would see as, some basic understanding of mental health versus mental illness and where people fit there. So it's definitely not that black and white, you're either well or you're unwell.
Right.
There's a whole lot in between.
Yeah. Thanks, Tara. What about holistic mental health? Like what does that mean when we hear the term holistic mental health? And what ways can we consider that in our everyday lives?
So I love this question because I think it just really, encapsulates a lot. So for many, many years, we were really focused on a biomedical model of mental illness. And, sometimes I dislike even using the word mental illness because it can be stigmatizing to some communities, like, for example, the MAD community. And, I think we're now just reaching a paradigm shift in our society to look at mental health from a more, less so that medical model, and a bit more so a socio-structural or sociocultural model of mental wellness, right? So mental health, and what I mean by that is that mental health is no longer just being looked at as a physical, genetic, biological, or physiological factor. We're recognizing that is one piece. It's an important piece, but it is one piece of the pie that makes up all of what mental health and wellness is. And so I think mental health is just really evolving to reconsider the biological, the psychological, the social, and even the spiritual aspects of a person. So I really like this quote because I think it really, I think it just really like captures everything's kind of symbolic. It's the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So when we try to, I guess, support a person or heal a person by looking at the spiritual, just that, or, the physical, just that, we're only treating part. But when we look at the whole of a person and we treat in that holistic, full way, that is greater. That's going to have a greater, more lasting impact. And I think going to have more effectiveness in the long run. And I think we're getting greater at doing that as a society, and certainly at NL Health Services with our client-centered and family-centered practices. So when we think of mental health from a social determinants of health perspective, that can also be considered as a holistic mental health and wellness perspective, right? And so what I mean by the social determinants of health is, it's a big word that we hear a lot. So it's like, okay, well, what are the social determinants of health? What are some social factors that determine our health other than just, biological, physical factors that can determine our health? So maybe some social factors that can determine our health and our mental health could be our employment, if we've been employed, if we've been, our level of education, if we've had traumatic experiences in our life, or ACEs, like adverse childhood experiences. How connected that we feel to our families, of course, is a social factor that impacts our health and our mental well-being. How connected we feel even to our community and a sense of belonging. All that can impact our mental health and well-being. as well as and on top of our biological and genetic factors. So holistic health and holistic mental health and wellness is an approach to life that is multidimensional and incorporates a lot of different aspects of wellness. So it encourages people to recognize the whole person, right? Like I said, the physical, the social, the spiritual, the emotional, all parts of yourself. And people in this sense are active participants in their own health decisions and their own health processes, and they're an active part of their healing. So it's not just about, self-care, 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 but it's also about, having some of that community care as well. And I'm going to bridge the gap, I think, a little bit later in another question, perhaps on that. And you would also mention, Cheryl, like some approaches to holistic mental health that we can do in our daily lives. So a lot of holistic mental health stuff is rooted in ancient, cultural, and traditional healing traditions. And, it can help us to achieve higher levels of health and wellness, and also perhaps even prevent disease. And these approaches can also be included with traditional medicine, traditional medical processes, right? We can continue to receive traditional medical services and also practice some of these holistic methods. So traditional holistic approaches can focus on things like food, herbs, supplements, teas, remedies, movement like dancing, singing, chanting, prayer, mindfulness and meditation are big ones we hear a lot. Drumming, sound and vibration, all of these things are things that are usually included in holistic practices. So some approaches are like acupuncture, for example, or chiropractic physicians, naturopathic doctors, meditation, guided imagery, yoga even. Some people get into Ayurveda, some people do Reiki and energy healings. So like I said, it's an inclusive and it's a multidimensional approach to health and wellness. And of course, that can be linked to experiencing positive mental health, right? We need to do what works for us individually. And I think also engaging and encouraging yourself and even your children in having some type of spiritual practice in your life can be really, really important. And when I say spirituality, I think it's important to make the distinction between religion and spirituality. If you have a religious practice, that is excellent, and you practice that and that works for you, that's fantastic. But spirituality does not necessarily need to be connected to having a religious practice. So finding a spiritual practice that works for you is proven in the literature to be a protective factor in the lifespan of a person in their whole life trajectory. So really, I do encourage that. I think the spiritual parts of people are often sort of pushed to the wayside, and spirituality is about a sense of belonging, a sense of meaning and purpose in life. And we all need that in order to have positive mental health and a sense of that meaning and purpose, right?
Yeah.
So I definitely encourage like finding a spiritual practice that works for you. And also understanding the basic principles of cognitive behavioral therapy, that your thoughts affect your feelings, which can affect your behaviors, which can affect even physical symptoms. And taking control of any one of those things on the wheel can help you take more control over your life. I think that's a really holistic practice as well. So I'm just going to quickly show a slide that is just a visual. Sometimes, talking about this stuff can be a bit airy-fairy, but a visual sort of, can concrete it. So I want to share that with you folks. Let's see, share. Okay, from current slide. All right, can everybody see this one?
Yes.
So I love this image. It's like a holistic wellness wheel. And it really looks at all the holistic aspects of a person's life and that really comprise or make up what wellness is. and what improved health and wellness and mental health is. So let's start with the spiritual, expanding our sense of purpose and meaning in life, right? Occupational wellness is personal satisfaction and enrichment derived from your work. Environmental wellness is good health by having pleasant, stimulating environments that support your well-being. Financial is satisfaction with current and future financial situations. Sociocultural wellness is developing a sense of connection, belonging, and a well-developed support system. Physical wellness is something that is preached to us so often, like recognizing the need for physical activity, diet, sleep, and nutrition. But that's just one aspect of the wheel of wellness, right? And that holistic picture. Emotional wellness is coping effectively with life and creating satisfying relationships. And intellectual, recognizing creative abilities and finding ways to expand your knowledge and skills. So yeah, I really love that picture. And I'm just going to move to the next slide really quickly on the CBT basics. So just a little quick visual on the thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and physical symptoms wheel. So if you're having negative thoughts, you're obviously going to have certain feelings, like maybe feeling sad. Your behaviors are then going to change, and you may even have physical symptoms, maybe like a sick tummy. And you can actually take more control over your life. What the principles of CBT are is that you can actually take more control over your life by changing any one thing on that wheel, like taking control over your physical symptoms, maybe going for a walk, taking some exercise to promote more endorphins, and that's going to change your thought patterns and how you feel, and then maybe even your behaviors. Or we can also work on changing our thought patterns and say, nope, you know what? When I think this way, or when I have these thoughts, I'm going to practice thinking in a different way. And then that changes your behaviors and your feelings and even your physical symptoms. So that's just kind of the basic principles of CBT and how I think they're really related to holistic mental health.
Thank you, Bailey. That was a great summary of holistic mental health and a great very quick snapshot of CBT model in a usable form. That was great. Robert, I wonder if it's a good time to check in with the attendees and see if anyone has a question for our panelists.
Sure, we got a couple here now. We got a question from Jason. I would like to know if you're seeing a trend towards increasing diagnosis or pathology around normal or expected human reactions, such as stress and anxiety, to everyday stressors and situations.
Well, I think that, I mean, we can't really speak much to diagnosis as we don't diagnose. Excuse me. However, I mean, yes, it has been trending. What that is attributing to, I personally believe, our lives are so busy and all consuming. And, going back to, when Bailey was talking so much about self-care, is most of us very evidently neglect that. And we don't have the same coping techniques as we could have. And I think this is why, mental health has become in the forefront in the last few years, is because there has been an increase in diagnosis, whether it's from, mental health or mental illness, and, addiction issues and whatnot. So, I mean, there's definitely a trending increase, absolutely. And I think that's why it's so important for us to have these discussions about mental health and about removing stigma and normalizing the conversations about mental health. And again, that might attribute to some of these increase in diagnosis. Maybe we are having more conversations about it. Maybe people are being more open than they were, say, 20 years ago. But yes, I mean, it's definitely increasing. And, that's kind of our speculations as to why that's happening.
I also totally agree with everything Lindsay just said. I think that this question asked by somebody from the community, it kind of runs into our next question actually. And I think one major answer or solution, I guess, around that is the need for growing literacy around mental health and addictions. Because when people don't understand what's happening to them, that's when they feel out of control. But when people are educated on mental health and addiction and wellness and illness and active steps and things they can do, that's more than just, hey, go to a yoga class, or, you know, try this new thing, or here, you know, here's a medication. You know, when they're actually engaged in knowledge, you know, you feel like you have more control over the solution. And I think that really runs into our next question, actually.
Yeah, it does, Bailey, that quite well. Let's talk about stress.
Yeah.
Any number of things can cause stress, any number of circumstances. How would you advise that people deal with the stressors, the things that are causing the stress?
Right. So, like I just mentioned, we need a growing literacy around the stress response, what the stress response is. So, we as human beings are built for survival. We have a survival instinct and a survival response, right? So, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. So, many of us have probably heard those terms, especially fight and flight, right? So that's your body's automatic response to a perceived threat in your environment. So we need to dig a little bit deeper, and we need to educate the public and the masses on how this natural stress response, how this instinct that we have as human beings is related to mental health. So we need to learn what the stress response looks like how do we behave when a person is going through a stress response? What does it feel like when a person is going through one of these stress responses? And then we're able to better identify, well, what is my personal stress response? How do how do I usually cope when I'm going through stressors? And then when you get good at identifying it in yourself, you can get good at seeing it in other people. And then you can be, a supporter or a helper, right? So your brain is a threat detecting system. Like I said, we are wired for survival. And for some people, this system can be dysregulated for like any number of intersecting factors or reasons. It could be your life experiences, it could be trauma, it could be, adverse childhood experiences, it could be biological and genetic factors, right? So I'm just going to give a quick overview of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. So fight is an explosive anger response, and it's usually due to a deep fear of losing control and needing control, right? And flight is an avoidance and withdrawal, right? It's that avoidance and withdrawal response for survival. Freeze is interesting because freeze is what I would call a nervous system shutdown, where somebody really appears like they're low anxiety maybe, or lazy or apathetic or lethargic, but really they're in a disassociative state. They're disassociated, they're not connected to reality, they're not connected to their body. For survival, they're there for survival. And then fawn, the fawn response is also we're growing more knowledge and literacy around the fawn response. And fawn is really interesting because it's a learned coping mechanism that we learn to keep us safe by people pleasing, right? So when our environment felt unsafe and unpredictable, we learned how to dismiss our own needs and to focus on the needs of other people. So healing from nervous system shutdowns and healing from the stress response is possible, right? It's just about learning to feel safe in your own body, in your own mind, in your own environment, right? And that is possible. It just takes practice and it just takes work. So there are specific learned coping mechanisms for each stress response. So for example, fawn can be healed through learning to practice boundaries. So having someone guide you through practicing boundaries, someone that you trust, somebody who's safe for you in a safe and structured manner. Flight can be managed through lifting weights, cold plunging, deep belly breaths, things like that. I think when we educate our communities and our public on the stress response and how that is the natural response of many of our bodies, and that so many of us also have dysregulated nervous systems from so many factors and reasons why, but that there's also hope in healing that. And when we learn to become more knowledgeable about something, we have more control over it. We have more power. So education is key. Knowledge is key. Never underestimate, the power of keeping one small promise to yourself daily. That's how you build healthy habits. That's how you learn to cope. That's how you build self-esteem. Because if you have that one glass of water every day and you keep doing that every day for a week, then maybe the next week or the next month, you can add something after that glass of water, and you keep building on it and building on it and building on it, and you're doing it for you, right? So, knowledge is key, and habit stacking is how we build self-confidence and better coping. And, I think that as the prevention and promotion team, getting that literacy advanced out there around the stress response is super important.
This is so good, and I can see how things like the stress response, it impacts our attachments, which impacts our relationships, which impacts what we're going to talk about now in a second. Can potentially impact loneliness, social isolation, which has a huge impact on mental health. Can we talk about that a little bit? Lindsay, maybe can you talk a bit about how social isolation can impact mental health?
Absolutely. Absolutely, Cheryl. And I'll just go back to, our most recent pandemic of COVID. And, CAMH has brought forward some stats from that, and it indicated that 7 out of 10 Canadians reported being impacted negatively, specifically with depression and anxiety when the COVID measures were in place. And, going back to, when Bailey was talking about a holistic health, this all comes full circle again. So, we need social connections to survive. Like, it's hardwired for us to rely on support of other people. It's vital to our health. When we don't have that, we're often, feeling depressive symptoms. We are physically and emotionally sicker, and we are at risk for like early death because of that. Um, Specifically with your mental health, a lot of times people report, suicidal thoughts, suicidal attempts. And again, going back to Bailey's holistic approach, less sleep, not having restful sleep, your eating habits changing. During the COVID, we've seen a huge increase in addictions. There's more stress on people, especially, when we were forced to work or not forced to work and looking after childcare, schools being closed. It was a lot. A lot of people still are recovering from that. I think it's going to be like almost an experimental generation coming through. I hear a lot of my friends with younger kids talk about that their children really struggled with socializing even in public places after that because they weren't used to that. We take for granted just going to the mall, getting groceries, little things like that with your children. And a lot of people really notice the impacts on their children from that. So it's going to be very interesting to see those impacts. Loneliness and isolation are very different things. However, isolation very much has significant impacts. Teenagers that experience isolation are often likely to struggle with depression in adulthood. And our seniors are a very vulnerable population that we have. And socialization with our seniors has been noted to cause a 40% increase in dementia. So, that is absolutely significant. So with the social isolation, it's very important again, like to get rid of the stigma and talk about it. Talk about how you're feeling. Talking about how COVID impacted you and things you want to do to improve your health. Getting outside is huge. In Labrador, for example, we have a lot of sunshine in the winter. However, it's too cold to get out. So our bodies are depleted of vitamin D. That is significant for your depressive symptoms. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of SAD, seasonal effects disorder. It's a real thing. Being isolated, being in your home, not taking the supplements you need, those things absolutely affect you. Reconnecting with interests that you have. If you liked going to the gym and you weren't able to go for whatever reason, or if it was during COVID and now we're after COVID, but you're kind of getting hard to get motivated to get back in. Again, like Bailey was saying, little things tend to build into bigger things and getting you back to yourself. So, you might just walk around the block a couple of times and then get back into, I don't know, maybe softball was your thing, getting back into playing softball when you're feeling up to it again. Again, self-care, particularly with us working in the health field. Um, generally we are geared to be looking after other people, and that's why we're interested in this field. And a lot of times we let ourselves go because of that, in the sense of we're focused on making sure everyone else is okay and not necessarily ourselves. So self-care is huge. And again, going back to, Bailey talking about habit forming, start with little things with self-care. And, some things sound really silly, like talking to yourself in the mirror and saying, I'm going to exercise today 10 times in a row. Eventually, your brain will start believing that, and it will come to fruition. So those things are huge, having a nice bath, just taking time for yourself, checking in with people. You may have family on the other side of the country that you haven't connected with in months. Connecting with your family, connecting with your friends. I know apparently I'm aging myself by saying Facebook, but connecting with friends. Apparently Facebook's for old people now.
I'm with you, Lindsay.
So connecting with your friends on Facebook, like looking at pictures of their family, what they're doing, their vacations, like, getting back into social settings, participating in your community. As Bailey said, part of our jobs, we're very involved with community and supporting mental health and addictions. And we also have a lot of activities ongoing throughout the year, like come out and join us in something. Maybe you might find a passion to get involved. And, I personally sit on 11 committees in my job. I know the girls sit on a lot as well. So maybe people might just want to do that. It might not necessarily mean that you need to get out and do it, but just, putting your input in, your life experiences. For the Mental Health Week, the theme is my story. Sharing your story, letting people know how you feel, how you're impacted by the day to day. I know, like in Newfoundland, a lot of times it's very easy to walk by and say, hey, how are you? And you don't really listen to that response and kind of continue on. Listen to that response. If someone asks you, like, just say, you know what? I've been doing really well, but this last week's been a struggle. And they might have something to offer you. Choosing the right living situation. And I'm probably going to get myself in a bit of trouble now because my husband do not like the cold and really wants to relocate. But that stuff is significant. If you're living in a climate that you're not used to and you're finding that really hard on your ability to get out and do things you enjoy, maybe something significant like a job change or a physical location change is something you need to look at. We just done, actually, Bailey developed this little activity as part of our week that I implemented in my region as well. And it was 5 of your favorite things. And when Bailey said it, she done it last year, was talking about the responses. And I thoroughly enjoyed reading through the responses. But one of the things that came very clearly through was people's work and work environment. So many people talked about their friendships at work. And that's another thing that's vital in, the socialization, I'm sorry, is, like develop those friendships at work. I know a job's a job, but, having that time at work is huge, connecting with your people at work. And also, of course, outside of work, getting involved with different organizations, volunteering your time. Little things like that bring so much joy to you as well. And that's a big part of self-care. When you're getting your morning coffee at McDonald's or Tim Hortons, compliment the person who's serving your coffee. Give them a smile, tell them to have a good day. And it's unbelievable how much that would impact your mental health for the day.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, getting out there is the simple answer, but there's lots of ways of doing that. And even remotely now, especially with our younger generation. I mean, in a mental health capacity, there's so many self-care groups, support groups, different things like that, or even just of interest. I noticed on Facebook the other day in our community, somebody went and said, you know, I'm really interested in Dungeons and Dragons. Are anyone else interested? Maybe we'll get a game going. And the response was outstanding. So, you know, put it out there, and you don't know who got same interest with you. And having that camaraderie, something in common, it's, you know, it gets you out of your comfort zone and starts getting you back into feeling more social and involved in your community.
Absolutely. Well said, Lindsay.
Yeah, I love this conversation so much. I want to check in with Robert though and see if there are any questions coming from attendees before we make.
There's some great questions here, and Lindsay, that was fantastic. I would say a lot of that resonates with most of the population, particularly vitamin D deficiency with the weather that we're having lately. But I got a question here. We talked about the effects of isolation, particularly those in with seniors. You know how COVID had a huge effect on that, particularly for seniors who were maybe living alone, or perhaps even seniors who were living in a long-term care facility who were forced in isolation and couldn't get any sort of visitation rights. So the question is, what are some current strategies for the treatment / prevention of depression in seniors?
Well, I would love to answer some of that. So seniors' mental health is actually a strategic priority for my role. I absolutely love working with seniors, and I work with a lot of different community groups for seniors, and go out and just do mental health presentations for seniors, especially around that stress response that we talked about a little bit earlier today. And I find seniors, and also some cognitive behavioral therapy principles as well for seniors. I find seniors so eager to learn, and they really are like thirsty for knowledge, and they love gathering together. So, you know, getting together and coming to a presentation and being there in person, and you know, they always are really engaging. You know, so I love going and facilitating, you know, with groups of older adults, because they really care about what you're bringing, and they really have so much to teach you too. I learn just as much from them. And you know, I think as a society collectively, we need to be responsible for our children, for our seniors, and for our community. I think volunteerism goes a long way. I think going and, you know, visiting seniors, if you're a part of different groups that I have a friend who's a part of a religious group. They go into different seniors' homes and do like music and visitations, and the seniors absolutely love it. I think that they're such an eager group to be connected with, and they have so much to teach us. I also don't know if anybody has seen this. It's been very much trending on, you know, Instagram, Facebook, social media. And it's like dating advice, or really any advice at all from seniors. And they all hold up like a piece of advice or life advice or something. And it's like a whiteboard, and they're like, my life advice or whatever. And it's awesome, you know, like there's just so much knowledge and experience and expertise that seniors have, and lived experience. And, you know, we need to access that more, and be less afraid to connect. I think sometimes we're just afraid to connect. But in my role specifically, seniors are a strategic priority. I go out and do lots of seniors presentations. I've got one actually next week at the Rabbittown Community Center. Yeah, very, very happy to be doing that work.
And Robert, just to kind of add on to that too, a little bit more concrete, is I feel like, you know, NL Health also has a role and responsibility to play. And I can't speak to every other region, but I know in our region, in our hospital here, we have a part-time worker that comes in and does activities with our seniors every day. It's amazing. So it could be baking, it could be gardening. We got a gardening center. There are staff and other patients that bring their pets up, and the seniors absolutely love that. Our community has been fabulous. So, you know, our Cub Scouts groups will come in and do a craft or activity with our seniors. We also have other seniors that come into our seniors and play, the traditional Newfoundland music and have live entertainment and different things like that. And like those things, and particularly I'm talking specifically for our long-term care clients, but I mean, those things just bring so much life to our people who are here. And like Bailey said, volunteering, like pop up and visit somebody, do a little activity with our seniors. Get them involved in local clubs. Like our community has a 50+ club. They bowl, they do crafts. They're having a prom night next week. So there's so many things to do, think outside the box to help include our seniors. I know our local union for our mines, they do periodic meal deliveries, and they'll cook a whole meal and you just sign up and they'll deliver a meal to your home. So there's so many ways to support our seniors and community. And again, it makes you feel good to do good things. So it's also
Get to
good for
know
your
your
mental health.
neighbors. Get to know your neighbors. Bring them over, like a plate of dinner or whatever, like those things are,
It's good to hear about these initiatives. Obviously, these long-term care facilities or personal care homes are part of your community, and it's good to have that sense of camaraderie within it. I'll ask one more question, Cheryl.
Sure.
Previously, you guys were talking about stigmatism around mental health or mental health issues. So the question is, what are some pathways one could take to help them feel more comfortable initiating a conversation about mental health, whether it be in regards to themselves or someone else?
Again, I feel with our roles, we're really trying to support telling your story and being open and making mental health and substance use a part of the general conversation and a part of our regular health. It's all connected. But I mean, if people are comfortable, share your story, whether it's on Facebook, whether it's, CAMH has a lot of different avenues where people can do it anonymously, sorry. And, people can do that, maybe kind of feel it out, put it out there. Nobody knows it's from you. Maybe you'll feel comfortable then talking to somebody else. Support groups where people are like-minded and struggling with some of the same things that you're struggling with will probably help you feel a bit more comfortable talking about your issues. You may go to a self-help group and sit for the first 3 sessions. You might not feel comfortable sharing, or you might feel comfortable sharing, with a friend or a colleague. Find that safe space, that safe person, and, do it when you're ready. And, not to be negative, but you may be willing to share your story with someone and not get the response you want. Try to kind of overcome that. And okay, maybe that wasn't your person. Maybe there's someone else you need to talk to. Safe spaces, like we have our Doorways program, that you can go in and talk to a mental health counselor. And I think the important part about it, like Tara was saying when she was talking about mental health, we all have mental health, good and bad days. So just recognizing that and being around people that are going through some things as well, and even supporting those people, and even being like, you know what, I can understand, I can empathize with how you're feeling, will help normalize that for you as well.
Yeah, normalizing awareness campaigns, and also knowledge exchange, more literacy through, education, right? Which is a big priority for us.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think using the language sometimes of like stress is easier than using the language of mental health. I think that no matter what age you are, like little children even understand, what that means. Teenagers, adults, seniors. It's a more kind of universally acceptable approach than mental health sometimes. Like the term mental health might be scary or might not, be relatable for some because it's, not a term that they're as familiar with because of, literacy, mental health literacy. But when we talk the word stress, it's universal. We've hosted events and we've said, oh, mental health and addictions is delivering, whatever activity. And you get no uptake. Nobody wants to be seen coming out to a mental health and addictions thing. We call it a no stress fest or whatever we want to call it. And we're going to talk about stress and strategies for reducing stress or coping strategies, which is the exact same thing we would talk about it for mental health and addictions. but we get people of all ages interested in coming to something like that. So I think reframing sometimes to, because we're not the scary folks at mental health and addictions, and we delivered the exact same thing, except we called it something else, but yet we had a very different response. So I think, we're not quite where we need to be with, the terms of mental health and mental illness and all that, but I think people can relate to wellness, they can relate to stress. So I think those are sort of universally relevant for all people. And it makes it easier for people to say, yeah, I'm going to participate in that and I'm going to come out, and there's no stigma associated with going to a wellness event. There's no stigma associated with going to an event to learn how to cope with stress, because everybody recognizes that they have that in their lives, no matter what their circumstance are.
That's amazing. Yeah, it makes the resources more accessible while working on literacy, right? Working on mental health literacy. That's amazing. I'm cognizant that we are running out of time soon, and we have a number of questions that we could get through, that we could go through. So I wonder, Robert, do we want to ask another from the attendees?
Yeah, sure. I got one more question perhaps we can ask. Once again, I'll bring it back to something that resonates with us all, because perhaps due to the weather. But it goes, thank you. This is great discussions. Can you suggest more coping methods and suggestions for grounding and getting back to normal energy levels? And I know for, a lot of us perhaps have this, especially due to bad weather, that, a lot of motivation issues come through. So can you suggest something?
Absolutely. So, like I talked about earlier, really learning what type of like stress response that you're undergoing. Like if you are somebody who is fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, really figuring out which one you are is going to help you identify which coping mechanisms are going to work best for you. So, deep breathing, it really, really works. Brent Bashira is a community advocate, mental health advocate, who leads a lot of cold water therapy adaptive training. So like cold, a lot of people have been doing that, like immersing themselves in cold water and getting the physical and mental benefits of that. And all of the literature that backs up things like that. That can really, really help with grounding. Meditation can be touchy. It depends on the person. Really, I would need to know, you know yourself best. So you need to identify what works best for you. But, meditation, I found when we would try to do a meditation in like a session with people, meditation would be disturbing for some folks, because being with themselves and being in their own mind and trying to be silent in their mind would bring up a lot of trauma. So guided visualizations, especially for men, guided visualizations are really, really helpful. So basically like finding that really nice memory or a really beautiful place that you like to go and being there. Or like even going through like a guided one that you might get on YouTube or something like that. That can really, really help with feeling grounded. Walking, never underestimate the power of a little walkie. A walk is fantastic. And learning and educating yourself, as much as you possibly can, and getting out maybe to some education sessions where you're around perhaps like-minded people, and maybe you got a hiking partner out of it, or a chat partner out of it, or something like that. So that's just like quick off the top of my head things I can think of right now without really knowing in depth this individual.
I think,
oh,
I'm
sorry.
sorry. I was going to say, I'll get Tara to kind of talk a bit about some of the mental health things when you get a sec. But like when you get out in nature, it's huge. And when we talk about mindfulness, it's little things. It's walking out it's spending time out in the woods, or spending time out in the land, and just like feeling the sun on your skin, and appreciating that, or being by the ocean and just breathing in the salt air. It don't have to be anything like very fine-tuned. It could be something as simple as, carrying lifesavers in your purse or in your pocket. And if you're feeling really stressed out, pop one in your mouth. feel like the little writing on the thing. Put your tongue through the hole in it. Enjoy the flavor. Guess the flavor. Just kind of getting your mind kind of distracted from where you are. And a quick, just to add to Bailey's, a quick breathing one that I find really good. It's called box breathing. So you breathe in, you count to 5. You hold it for 5. You let out for 5. And just repeat that until you feel like you're grounded again. It don't have, I mean, listen, people can really adapt to mindfulness and some different techniques and it be a huge part of your life, but just like quick tips, like little things like that are huge.
I was just going to add, and I mean, I think Lindsay, we were on the same page here because, for me, grounding is around, like being in the moment and the mindfulness, doing little mindfulness exercises, like the take 5, just and soothing senses. That's really focus on your senses. So, and it could be, you can do that anywhere. You can do it at your desk. You can do it outside. You can do it while you're eating your breakfast. And I mean, the thing is around the soothing senses, the same, comment you had around the lifesaver. I mean, you could do that with, a strawberry. What does it look like? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? And really take your time to focus on how enjoyable that, strawberry is to, and of course at the end you get to eat it. So, and recognize the taste and enjoy that. So in the moment, you're taking that 5, minutes or 5, it don't even have to be 5 minutes. It can be 1 minute to just focus and zero your attention on something like that. And I find when you think about your your 5 senses, then that's the quick grounding technique that you can, because you can do that anywhere and you can use pretty much anything. So it could be the sun on your face, like Lindsay was talking about outside. It could be, the texture of a rock that you picked off the ground and you're focusing on that. I mean, you're obviously not going to taste the rock, but, it depends on what your circumstance or what you're using to focus on. But, to use your senses to really be in that moment to focus on that thing is, the quickest grounding technique. And while breathing, you can, again, do anywhere, just slow your breath and do it anywhere.
Talking about the soothing senses, I was at my son's school last week, and they have a area set up in the main lobby for that kiddos can use if they're feeling the need to be more grounded. Stations like that, I thought it was just fantastic. He's in kindergarten, so I thought it was great to introduce something like that. I wish we had more time to get to go through a few more topic areas. I thought it would be a good idea if we left off by talking about what resources, what programs or resources related to mental health and addictions are available.
Cheryl, I can take that one, and I'll try to make it quick, even though it will be informative. Like we have with our step care model of mental health and addiction services in this province, we have 3 access points. Now, these 3 access points can connect you with formal or informal services, depending on what you're looking for. But the access points are, one is online at bridgethegap.ca, that's 2 P's.ca. So that's our go-to website that has mental health information. It has links to online programs, like all those e-mental health programs that you can do on your own time, which I'm going to put a little plug in around the stigma question here as well, because for those who are reluctant to kind of seek help and they're not ready to go talk about it, there are a lot of self-help options. There's a lot of e-mental health programs available that people can access from the comfort of their own home. And, perhaps they're not ready, or perhaps they're never ready to go and take that, and maybe counseling is not necessarily the option for them. There are lots of other options. So bridgethegap.ca is our go-to place to go look up some of those things. It also has a really, really inclusive service directory, and it's divided down in regions. So you can search by region, you can search by topic. And this includes like our community-based services. It includes our mental health and addiction services throughout the province. So this is our provincial go-to online resource. In person, we have doorways. So a lot of our doorways locations provide quick access to mental health and addictions counseling services. So that counseling service could be, to help you navigate, or it could be what you need in terms of talk therapy or linked to some other specialized service. So Doorways is our kind of our quick access to counseling option. So you call your local office, and you can look up your mental health and addictions office online, or you can call 811. So by telephone, our access point is 811. And we're actually now transitioned since May, I think it was, we transitioned our mental health crisis line service to 811. So now when you call 811, you can access that crisis intervention service the same as you did through the 1-800 number, except it's easier for people to remember that number. So our goal basically is to have, with these 3 access points, is to kind of streamline. This is, you got choice. You can do in person, you can do by telephone, or you can go online to try to access to service. And no matter which way you go, you kind of got this, you're accessing the same services and the same information. So we're trying to make that consistent information across the province, and no matter where you are in the province, those things will be accessible to you. The other last thing, because there's lots of like help lines and things like that I could talk to, but I know I'm cognizant of our time. But I will say we do have a mental health and addictions systems navigator, Barry Hewitt. And for some, if you're having challenges navigating the mental health and addiction service system, for whatever reason, we do have that service available. Again, you can access that by calling 811, go in the Doorways, or Bridge the Gap. You can get that contact information. So as long as you can remember one of those things, then you can have access to mental health and addiction services in our province.
We have a wealth of community services available
Yes.
to us in and around, our whole province. The Status of Women, Quadrangle, Canadian Mental Health Association, just to name a few off the top of my head. And also, I just want to bring up something that we do have at NL Health Services here in the Eastern Zone. We have the Wellness Collective by Brenda Halley, which is an incredible example of social prescribing. So she leads a group filled with people with lived experience of mental illness and or addiction, and folks who are just interested in wellness. And they do lots of cool activities, from snowshoeing to baking classes to community gardens, and lots of cool things. So if you're interested in something like that, getting connected with Brenda Halley.
That's amazing. Robert, I think we might have to have a discussion later about another one of these, because we did not get through all of the things that we could have gotten through. So why don't you clue us up,
I'm
Robert?
going to wrap it up. Guys, this has been fantastic. It's too bad it was limited to an hour. But I want to thank Cheryl, Bailey, Lindsay, and Tara for leading us through a great discussion on mental health today. A big thank you to everyone who joined us online to listen and participate in our discussion. And just a reminder that a recording of this session will be on YouTube within the coming days. We hope you'll join us later this month on May 30th for our next session on successful aging. We talked a lot about seniors today. We'll be joined by Dr. Susan Mercer, who is a Care of the Elderly trained family physician, and Kelly Hayes from Seniors NL. And lastly, you'll see a very short post-event survey on your screen after we end the webinar. We'd appreciate you providing any feedback or ideas for future healthy discussions. So thanks again to everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.